I've always been the quiet one, the helper, the one who remembered to bring dessert to Sunday dinners or showed up early just to help Mom set the table. My life's never been flashy. I don't have the kind of job you brag about at reunions or clothes that turn heads. But I've worked hard. God, have I worked hard. Long hours, skipped lunches, weekends that bled into Mondays, all so I could build something out of nothing. But no matter what I did, I always felt small. Like I was standing in the corner of a room where no one even knew I was there. Still, I loved them. My parents. Even if they never really saw me. And for years, I dreamed of doing something that would change that. Not to impress them. Not really. But maybe to finally matter. They'd always wanted a new car, something reliable and shiny that would make the neighbors peek over the hedges. So I saved. I clipped coupons, took on extra shifts, said no to every little thing I wanted, because someday I knew I'd hand them the keys to their dream. I wanted that moment, that smile, that warmth. I wrapped the box myself, small, simple, neat, a gold ribbon tied tight at the top. Inside it, just one key, tucked into soft cotton, like a secret waiting to be told. I remember standing on their porch that weekend, heart racing like I was 12 again, bringing home a handmade card. When Mom opened the door, she looked surprised. "You didn't say you were coming," she said, and Dad, behind her, already turning back toward the game. But I smiled anyway. I was proud, nervous, hopeful. I wanted this to be a good memory. For all of us. I handed her the box, both palms up like I was offering something sacred. "It's for you," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. She took it like it weighed nothing, shook it a little, laughed. "What's in here? A chocolate? A ring?" Dad chuckled too, leaning in with that dry tone he always used when something didn't impress him. "You really couldn't do better?" I waited for the smile to follow, the moment they'd open it. But they didn't. They just kept laughing, shaking their heads like I was some joke they hadn't realized was funny before. I wanted to disappear. I stood there, still holding on to that flicker of hope. Maybe they were just teasing. Maybe they'd open it any second. But minutes passed and the box sat untouched on the coffee table like it was too ridiculous to even bother with. Mom waved her hand dismissively and said, "Really, you should be ashamed. You're not a kid anymore." Dad didn't even look at me, just reached for the remote and muttered, "Always so dramatic, always trying too hard." I could feel the sting in my throat, the heat in my face, but I smiled. I always smiled. It was like the air got thicker in the room, heavy with everything I couldn't say. I wanted to scream, to ask why nothing I did was ever enough, but my voice got stuck somewhere between my ribs and my teeth. So I just stood there, hands trembling, heart aching, trying to figure out how it had gone so wrong. All I wanted was a moment where they'd see me, not as a disappointment, not as someone who always fell short, but as their daughter. The one who never stopped loving them, even when it hurt. I cleared my throat, trying again. "It's something special," I said, motioning to the box. But Mom was already walking into the kitchen, muttering about needing more coffee. And Dad? He didn't move. "You always make things complicated," he said without looking at me. "Always with the gestures. Just be normal." I swallowed hard. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was trying to be thoughtful. But to them, that was the same thing. And for a second, I felt foolish, like I was still that little girl showing off her report card just to be told it wasn't worth putting on the fridge. So I picked up the box, not because I wanted to take it back, but because it hurt to see it there, so unwanted, so misunderstood. I looked at them one last time. Two people I had loved more than they'd ever know, sitting in their living room like I was just a stranger trying to sell something they didn't need. I held the box close and said softly, "I just wanted to see you smile. I didn't expect it would be at my expense." Then I turned around and walked out, the sound of their laughter still echoing behind me. I don't remember getting back to the car. Just the weight of the box in my hands and the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, the kind that rings in your ears, makes you feel small. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wheel like it might give me answers. The spare key was in my pocket. I ran my fingers over it again and again, as if touching it would make the moment make sense. It didn't. Nothing did. I had pictured joy, grateful tears, maybe even a hug. What I got was mockery, and a reminder of where I stood. That gift wasn't just about the car. It was everything I'd carried for years, every thankless gesture, every ignored effort, every quiet act of love they never saw. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this time they would. That giving them something they'd always dreamed of would open a door. Not just to the garage, but to me. But I was wrong. Not because they didn't want the gift, but because they didn't recognize the heart behind it. And maybe they never would. That was the part that broke me more than anything. I put the box in the passenger seat, resting it gently like it still mattered. The ribbon had come a little loose, but I didn't retie it. It felt like a metaphor I wasn't ready to admit. My chest ached, not from anger, I wasn't even angry, but from something deeper. That ache you get when you realize love alone isn't always enough to be seen. I leaned my head against the window, watching the clouds move. Part of me wanted to drive back, to yell, to beg, to shake them into understanding. But the bigger part, the one I'd ignored for years, she was done begging. There's a kind of pain that doesn't need an audience. It just sits with you, quietly, reshaping everything you thought was true. As I started the engine, the box shifted slightly on the seat, still unopened, still full of everything they'd missed. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I felt the tears waiting, just behind the eyes. And as I pulled away from their house, something inside me shifted. I couldn't name it yet. I didn't know where it would take me. But I knew this. Something had cracked open. And sometimes, the only way to be heard is to stop speaking altogether. I tried to speak. I really did. My mouth opened, but the words came out crooked. Too soft, too shaky, too full of that sting you get when your chest tightens and your voice betrays you. Please, just open it, I managed. But they didn't even turn around. Mom was at the sink, rinsing her cup like we hadn't just shattered something fragile. Dad sighed, like I was the inconvenience. "Here we go again," he said. And with those 4 words, everything inside me crumbled. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a problem to roll their eyes at. Tears started to blur my vision, but I blinked them back. Not here. Not in front of them. Not after everything. I wanted to scream that I had given up so much for this. Skipped dinners, missed sleep, taken on side jobs until my bones ached, just to bring them a little joy. But all they saw was drama. "You're always so ungrateful," Mom said sharply, drying her hands on a towel she wouldn't meet my eyes over. "Always making things about you." I stood frozen, humiliation and heartbreak twisting together in my gut. I didn't even recognize the girl they were describing. I could feel something closing up inside me. Like a door I'd left open for too long was finally being slammed shut. I didn't say another word. I just walked over to the table and placed the box there. Gently, like it still had meaning. And for me, it did. Not just because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. Years of trying. Years of hoping. I rested my hand on it for a moment. A silent goodbye to whatever dream I had left of being enough for them. And then, without another glance, I walked out the front door. My legs carried me to the car before I even realized I was moving. Once inside, I shut the door and let out the breath I'd been holding since they laughed. The silence was deafening. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the spare key, the twin to the one they never cared to discover. I held it so tightly in my hand, it left marks in my skin. It felt cold, heavy, final. My chest hurt in that deep, hollow way grief does. Not the grief of death, but the grief of finally accepting what's never going to be different. I sat there in the driver's seat, staring out at the same street I used to ride my bike on as a kid, back when I thought love was loud and unconditional. But it turns out, sometimes it's quiet and conditional. I pressed the key into my palm, remembering every step that led me here. The night shifts I took on weekends, the secondhand clothes I wore to hide how tight money was, the birthday I skipped celebrating so I could make another payment. All of it, every sacrifice, was for them. For a moment, that never came. The worst part wasn't their words. It was how easy they said them. Like I was a stranger who'd interrupted their afternoon. Like my heart didn't matter. I kept wondering, what did I do so wrong? Was loving them too much the mistake? Was trying too hard something to be ashamed of? I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel, and the tears finally came. Quiet, fast, unstoppable. It wasn't just sadness. It was exhaustion, from always being the one who tried. From carrying a relationship on my back that they barely seemed to notice was even there. And as the tears blurred everything, I saw flashes of my journey. Eating cereal for dinner so I could send them flowers on anniversaries. Walking home in the rain because I chose to save on bus fare. Saying no to friends, to travel, to anything that might pull me away from this one goal. Making them proud. But they never saw the effort. They only ever saw the absence of perfection. And now, I realized, maybe they weren't capable of seeing more than that. Maybe their love had always come with fine print I never noticed until now. I wiped my face with my sleeve, the ache settling deeper into my bones. I wasn't going to chase after them again. Not this time. Something had shifted. Not just between us, but inside me. The part of me that had always hoped, always tried to fix it, had finally gone quiet. Not bitter. Just still. Because when love doesn't move someone, silence sometimes says more. I looked down at the spare key again, resting in my palm like a piece of something broken and beautiful. And I thought, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is the beginning of finally choosing me. I drove without knowing where I was going. I just needed to be away. From their house, from that moment, from the version of me that still hoped they'd change. Every red light felt like a breath I didn't know I needed. Every mile gave me a little more distance from the ache. But I couldn't stop replaying it all in my head. The way they laughed, the way they looked through me, the way I left that small box on the table like a piece of my heart they'd never care to unwrap. It haunted me. Still does some days. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot by the river, a quiet spot where I used to come as a teenager to clear my head. I sat there, engine off, listening to the soft hum of the world outside. A couple walked by holding hands. A dog barked in the distance. Life moved forward, like it didn't even notice what had broken inside me. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that's how healing begins. Not with some grand gesture, but in the quiet moments when no one's watching and you let yourself feel everything. I didn't rush it. I just sat and breathed. In that stillness, I thought about all the things I had given up. Not just money or time, but pieces of myself I'd traded in for their approval. And now, sitting here alone, I realized something painful and necessary. Love isn't supposed to make you feel invisible. It's supposed to make you feel held, supported, seen. I looked at the spare key on the passenger seat. It no longer felt like a symbol of failure. It felt like a line in the sand, a quiet decision. If they couldn't open a box, they'd never open their hearts, and I was done waiting. That night, I didn't go back. Not to their house, not to the version of myself that needed their validation to feel worthy. I went home, to my little apartment, to the blankets I'd bought on sale, to the dinner for one I'd left in the fridge. I changed into pajamas, sat on the floor, and held that key like it still meant something. Because it did. Just not in the way I thought. It wasn't about what I gave them. It was about what I'd finally given myself, permission, to walk away, to be hurt, to heal, and to let silence speak the words they never cared to hear. A few days went by. No messages, no missed calls, just the kind of silence that felt like confirmation. Not of peace, but of pride. I wondered if they'd touched the box, if maybe curiosity had finally cracked through their mockery, but part of me already knew the answer. I pictured it exactly where I left it, sitting on the edge of the table like an afterthought, maybe even pushed aside to make room for a magazine or a grocery list. That box wasn't just a gift anymore. It had become a mirror, and they didn't want to look. They did what they always did. They laughed it off. I found out later they'd told relatives about the dramatic little gift I brought over. Made jokes about how I must have wrapped up a coupon or some soap. Someone even said, "Well, at least she tried." And they all laughed again. That laugh, it sticks with me more than the words. That smug, dismissive kind of laugh that doesn't just hurt, it erases you. But life has a funny way of circling back, of placing the truth right in front of the very people who refuse to see it. It was a friend of theirs, an old neighbor, I think, who finally asked, "What's that little box?" Just a casual question over coffee. I imagine my mom brushing it off, saying something like, "Oh, just something our daughter left. Nothing important." But the friend insisted. Maybe she even picked it up herself, felt the weight, noticed how carefully it was wrapped. And for the first time, maybe that detail registered. Maybe the silence of it said more than anything I ever could. So finally, they opened it. And the truth was waiting inside. Just a key. Simple. Silver. No note. No explanation. But I didn't need to spell it out. That key said everything. And for the first time, I like to believe they sat there in silence. The real kind. The kind that hums with realization. The kind that settles into your bones when you know you've made a mistake so big, there aren't words enough to patch it over. I wasn't there to see their faces, but I imagined them still. That slow blink. That tightening in the chest. That dreadful, unmistakable feeling of, what have we done? Eventually, they stepped outside. I imagine it wasn't immediate. Maybe they paced the kitchen first, unsure. Maybe Dad made a snide comment to save face, and Mom told him to shut up for once. But they walked, down the driveway, past the hedges, and there it was, parked just down the road like I'd left it. Quiet, clean, waiting. It wasn't flashy, not some luxury model, but it was brand new, paid in full, practical, reliable. Exactly the kind of car they'd dreamed about for years. The kind they used to point out in dealership windows and say, maybe someday. Taped to the inside of the windshield was a note. I kept it simple. Just a few words I'd rewritten a dozen times before leaving it there. For the ones who taught me how to drive, even if they never steered me right. I don't know if it hit them immediately. Some people take longer to feel the weight of words like that, but I hope it did. I hope it settled into their chests like a stone, reminding them that gifts don't always come with fanfare. Sometimes they come quietly, wrapped in love, layered in pain, and left outside your front door. I wonder how long they stood there, if they looked at each other, if they felt the shame rise up in their throats and realized this wasn't about a car. It was about what they threw away when they chose pride over grace, what they mocked while it still had a heartbeat. Maybe they thought they'd teach me a lesson by not opening the box. But in the end, the lesson belonged to them. And this time, it wasn't wrapped in ribbon. It was parked right in front of them, in plain sight, unmistakable. They hadn't just dismissed a gesture. They'd dismissed a person. Me. The girl who still believed, even after all the cold shoulders and clipped words, that maybe, just maybe, her love would be enough. That one thoughtful act could fix what years of neglect had built. But they never opened their hearts. They only ever opened their mouths. And when they finally did open that box, what spilled out wasn't just truth. It was consequence. You can't mock what you don't understand and expect it to wait around forever. I wasn't there for the fallout. I didn't need to be. Some moments are better felt from a distance, the kind where your absence says more than your presence ever could. I imagine they went back inside slowly, the weight of that key still resting in their hands, heavier now than when they first laughed at the box. Maybe Mom sat at the kitchen table and stared at the gift wrap she'd barely glanced at days before. Maybe Dad turned off the TV for once. I like to think the silence that followed was loud, deafening. I heard from someone that they stopped talking about it. No more jokes, no more retelling the story with a smirk. Just nothing. That same someone said the box was still sitting on the counter, even after they opened it, like they didn't know what to do with it now, like they were afraid to throw it away. but too proud to admit what it meant. And in a strange way, that silence, their hesitation, was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. Not in words, but in what they didn't say. And that was enough. I didn't need the apology. I just needed the truth to land where it belonged. For once, the message wasn't lost. It found its way past all their noise. And maybe it rattled something in them, maybe not, but it wasn't mine to carry anymore. That chapter, the one where I tried and they refused to see, was finally closed. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, out of self-respect. The kind that doesn't demand recognition. It simply walks away when it's no longer being received. They hadn't just rejected a gift, they'd rejected the person giving it. And once that kind of damage is done, there's no rewinding the moment, no rewrapping the box, no way to undo the silence that should have held love, but instead was filled with laughter that cut too deep. What they threw away wasn't wrapped in ribbon. It was wrapped in me, my time, my sacrifices, my care. And when they finally opened that box, what they found wasn't a car key. It was the sound of a door quietly closing behind them. They called. Of course they did. The kind of call that comes not from love, but from discomfort. The kind where your name flashes on their screen like a task they forgot to complete. I saw it ring once, twice, then stop. No voicemail. Just silence pretending it didn't scream. A few hours later, a message popped up. Hey, just saw the car. Very thoughtful. Things have just been hectic. I stared at it for a while. Thought about replying. Thought about all the things I could say. But I didn't. Because they didn't want the truth. They wanted out of the guilt. More text followed. Short, clumsy, vague. You know how your dad jokes. You're too sensitive sometimes. Let's talk when things cool off. But nothing about the box. Nothing about their laughter. Nothing about the way they gutted me with a smile. I realized then that what they wanted wasn't reconciliation. It was relief. They wanted me to let them off the hook so they could go back to normal. But normal was broken. Normal had been broken for a long time. I just hadn't been brave enough to step away from it until now. So I didn't answer. Not out of spite. But because I finally understood the value of silence. Not the passive kind, the kind that waits. But the active kind, the kind that chooses. I chose to stop explaining myself to people who never really listened. I chose to let the stillness speak for me. And in that space, I started hearing things I'd buried for years. My own voice, my own pain, my own worth. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't being drowned out. I started writing. At first, just in a notebook. Little pieces of what had happened, the things I was too ashamed to admit even to myself. Then, one day, I shared part of it online, anonymously. I thought maybe one person would read it, maybe two. But the response was overwhelming. People understood. Strangers I'd never met shared their own heartbreaks, their own unopened boxes. My parents did the same. This broke me. I've never told anyone this before. And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. I was heard. That flood of voices, it changed something in me. I'd spent years trying to shrink myself to fit inside someone else's version of acceptable. But reading those comments, those raw confessions from people all over the world, made me realize I wasn't broken. I was just unheard. And there's a big difference. I began to see my story not as an embarrassment, but as something powerful. A mirror for others who were still whispering their pain in the dark. So I kept writing, kept sharing. And each time, the silence inside me got a little softer, a little kinder. The post went viral. I didn't expect it. One morning, I woke up to thousands of messages, articles, podcasts, even influencers resharing it with captions like, "This hit hard." Suddenly, my quiet pain had a voice. And people listened. They saw the daughter, the effort, the rejection, and something else happened too. I stopped wishing my parents would understand. because now I knew I wasn't the only one who'd tried to wrap love in ribbon and been met with ridicule. My story was no longer theirs to define. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt invisible. Not long after, I got a message from someone at a local charity. A woman, single mom, 2 jobs, barely making rent, had read the post and reached out. She said she didn't want anything, just wanted to thank me for making her feel seen. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about all the mothers out there giving everything, hoping their kids would feel the love that mine never seemed to. And then I knew what I needed to do. That car? It wasn't tied to them anymore. It was tied to purpose, to healing, to something bigger than me. I arranged to meet her on a cool, cloudy morning. She thought I was just there to donate to the charity. But when I handed her the key, the same one they never opened, her eyes filled with tears, she kept saying, "Are you sure? Are you serious?" I nodded and smiled. "It's yours," I said, "for someone who knows the value of small things." We hugged. No cameras, no speeches, just 2 women, connected by what we'd both lost and what we were still brave enough to give. That moment did more for my soul than all the years of seeking approval ever could. Driving home that day, the seat beside me was empty, but my heart wasn't. For the first time in a long while, I felt full. Not because I had something, but because I had let something go. That car had once symbolized hope that my parents might finally see me. Now, it stood for something so much stronger, my ability to see myself, to know that my love didn't go to waste. It had just been waiting for the right place to land. And it landed in the hands of someone who understood its weight without needing it explained. I didn't tell my parents. They still sent the occasional text, still tried to nudge the door open with half apologies wrapped in jokes. But I didn't answer. Not to punish them. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in peace. And I was finding it, slowly, in therapy sessions that helped me rewrite the story I'd told myself for years. In friends who saw me clearly, without the layers of shame. In small, ordinary moments that didn't need to be earned to be beautiful. Peace, I was learning, isn't loud. It's quiet. Like a new breath after being underwater. The story kept growing. A podcast picked it up. Then a women's magazine. Headlines like "The Girl with the Box They Never Opened" started popping up in places I'd never imagined. And with every share, the message got stronger. Not about me, but about all of us who were told our love was too much, too soft, too inconvenient. I wasn't some viral sensation. I was a reflection of daughters, sons, friends, people who gave from the deepest parts of themselves, only to be laughed at. And finally, we weren't laughing anymore. That day by the river, the day I cried alone in my car, I thought I'd lost something I could never get back. But now I know. That was the beginning. The moment I stopped begging to be loved and started learning how to love myself. They wanted luxury. I found purpose. And in the silence that followed, I built something they never could. A life rooted in truth, in kindness, in dignity. Not to prove anything to them, but to remind myself that I was never the problem. I was always the gift. I wrote the letter slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of care. Every word felt like a thread I was finally ready to tie off. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was honest, maybe more honest than anything I'd ever said to them face to face. I thanked them, truly, for the roof over my head, for the food on our table, for the life they gave me. And then I thanked them again, for the lesson, for showing me what love shouldn't feel like, what it shouldn't cost, what I should never again settle for. I told them I forgave them, not because they asked, not because they deserved it, but because I needed to. Carrying that weight had worn me down for far too long. I forgave them because I was done letting their voices echo inside me louder than my own. I forgave them because healing isn't about waiting for an apology. It's about reclaiming your peace, no matter who chooses to stay stuck. And with every sentence, I felt something uncoil in me. Like a knot that had held my breath for years was finally loosening. I signed the letter with my full name, not a nickname, not "your daughter," just me. the woman I'd become, the one they never really got to meet. I sealed it, placed it in an envelope, and mailed it without ceremony. No tracking number, no expectations, just a quiet release. A final word, sent not to open a new chapter with them, but to close the old one, gently, on my terms. It was the last thing I owed them. Or maybe, the last thing I owed myself. After that, I turned my phone to silent, not in anger, but in calm. I wasn't waiting for their reply. I wasn't hovering over notifications, hoping for validation. I had found a different kind of closure, the kind that doesn't depend on who receives the message, but on who sends it. And I knew in my bones, they might read it, they might not, they might scoff, or maybe they'd cry. But none of that belonged to me anymore. What mattered was simple. I had spoken, clearly, kindly, firmly, and I was done. I used to think forgiveness had to come with reconciliation. That to heal meant we had to meet in the middle, find some common ground, hug it out. But healing, I've learned, is quieter than that. Sometimes it's just deciding not to bleed from the same wound twice. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need them to suddenly become who I always wished they were. I needed space, and I gave that to myself, like the gift I'd been waiting on all along. It was strange, really, how powerful silence can be when it comes from love, not fear. The story didn't go away. If anything, it kept growing. People messaged me from all corners of the world. Some just wanted to say thank you. Others poured their hearts out, sharing stories they'd never dared say aloud. One woman told me she printed out my words and kept them in her wallet. Another said she left a toxic home after reading my post. And I realized then, the real gift I gave wasn't a car. It was the truth, spoken aloud, shared freely. Carried by strangers like a light in places I'd never been. Sometimes I listen to the podcast episode about it, the one where they read my story, slowly, with reverence. It still catches me off guard to hear my words in someone else's voice. But it also reminds me that I'm not invisible anymore. That girl with the box they never opened? She became a woman who finally opened her own heart. To herself. To others. To a life that didn't revolve around earning love. I think we all deserve that. A moment where we stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start saying, "There was never anything wrong. And now my life is quiet in the best kind of way. No chaos, no waiting, just stillness that feels like freedom. I cook meals just for me. I buy flowers because they make me smile. I don't over-explain, don't overgive, don't reach where there's no warmth. My world may be smaller now, but it's honest. Every corner of it belongs to someone who finally decided to be enough without needing to be chosen. And the truth is, I was never asking for too much. I was just asking the wrong people. I live by the sea now. A little cottage with chipped paint and windows that catch the morning sun just right. It's quiet here, gentle. The kind of place where you can hear your own thoughts and not be afraid of them. Some evenings, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea and let the wind braid itself through my hair. I watch the waves roll in and out, like they're carrying pieces of my old life out into the deep. And with every tide, I feel lighter. More myself, more whole. Inside, there's a small shelf where I keep a few reminders, not of pain, but of truth. The spare car key rests there, not as a relic of hurt, but as a symbol of what was given, what was missed, what was reclaimed. I don't stare at it. I don't need to. Its presence is quiet, steady, like a chapter that's already been written and doesn't need rewriting. Sometimes when the light hits it just right, I think, this is what closure looks like. Not a grand finale, just a soft, solid knowing. They never wrote back, not even once, and that used to sting. But now I see it for what it is. A final, unwilling silence. The kind that closes a door, not with grace, but with pride. And still, I choose peace. I choose to let that silence be theirs to carry. Mine is different. Mine speaks. In every boundary I set, every kind word I offer, every time I hold space for someone else's story and say, I see you. My silence is not absence. It is presence, deeply rooted, fiercely loving, unshakably whole. Sometimes I walk the shoreline and smile to myself, not out of satisfaction, but out of serenity. I remember who I was when I stood on that porch with a ribboned box in my hands, hoping. And I honor her, every trembling part, because she loved deeply, she gave fully, and when the door didn't open, she didn't wait, she built her own. I switch my phone to silent each night, not to shut the world out, but to keep the peace in, because they never opened the box, and now they'll never get the door.